Okay, welcome again. We're studying session 31 this week, and before we begin that study, let's take a moment of appreciation and invocation of our friends and guides. Thank you to those of Ra in particular. Thank you for being with us through this material and being with us in the invisible ways that you are. Thank you for your guidance on our paths. Thank you for your care for those of us behind the veil. Thank you to our friends at LL Research for bringing this material to all of our lives, for continuing to steward it so well. Thank you to all of us who study this material and seek to apply it well. Thank you to all of our guides and allies for supporting us in that endeavor. Thank you. Okay. So session 31, for those of us, if you are reading from the book, there's a reprint in 31.2 of all of Ra's response to 2638, and we're not going to read that again. So we'll just read what happened in session 31. Anyone willing to start us off?
I can start.
Great, thanks.
Okay. 31. Ra. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. We communicate now. Questioner. I would like to ask a question first for the instrument herself. She requests to know if it would be advisable for her to walk alone now that she feels better. I am Ra. This is acceptable. Questioner. Okay. What I'm going to do is use the information that we did at the end of the previous book that you suggested would be more appropriate for more advanced material. We will put it in the book at this point, as we are talking about bisexual reproduction, and I would like to expand on this material a little bit to get some definitions and better understandings. You speak in this material of sexual energy transfer. Could you define that energy transfer and expand upon its meaning, please? I am Ra. Energy transfer implies the release of potential energies across, shall we say, a potentiated space. The sexual energy transfer occur due to the polarizations of two mind-body-spirit complexes, each of which have some potential difference, one to the other. The nature of the transfer of energy or of the blockage of this energy is then a function of the interaction of these two potentials. In the cases where transfer takes place, you may liken this to a circuit being closed. You may also see this activity, as all experiential activities, as the creator experiencing itself. Questioner. Would this then be the primal mechanism for the creator to experience self? I am Ra. This is not a proper term. Perhaps the adjective would be one appropriate way of the creator knowing itself, where in each interaction, no matter what the distortion, the creator is experiencing itself. The bisexual knowing of the creator by itself has the potential for two advantages. First, in the green ray activated being, there is the potential for a direct and simple analog of what you may call joy, the spiritual or metaphysical nature which exists in intelligent energy. This is a great aid to comprehension of a truer nature of beingness. The other potential advantage of bisexual reproductive acts is the possibility of a sacramental understanding or connection, shall we say, with the gateway to intelligent infinity, where with appropriate preparation, work and what you may call magic may be done and experiences of intelligent infinity may be had. The positively oriented individuals concentrating upon this method of reaching intelligent infinity then, through the seeking or the act of will are able to direct this infinite intelligence to the work these entities desire to do, whether it be knowledge of service or ability to heal or whatever service to others is desired. There are two advantages of this particular method of the creator experiencing itself. As we have said before, the corollary of the strength of this particular energy transfer is that it opens the door, shall we say, to the individual mind-body-spirit complex's desire to serve in an infinite number of ways in other self, thus polarizing towards positive.
Let's pause. We could continue, but there's so much right there. So, yeah. So, sexual energy transfer. Discuss.
There are a couple things that come to mind. That I didn't catch the first time I read through this. First, it's just something subtle and small that I thought was really interesting is that Ross says joy.
Yeah.
Is like, what did he say? The direct and simple analog of joy, spiritual metaphysical nature. So like joy is just getting to know the nature of beingness, right? Is that like the nature of beingness is joy? That
totally. One of my favorite books that I keep up here by Byron Katie is A Thousand Names for Joy. And that, like, she talks about like life when we're living in a meditative kind of way is A Thousand Names for Joy, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's nice. So then the second, so I guess Ross says there's like two big benefits for sexual energy transfer. One is like it brings you joy, like gets you to know the better, like the nature of like beingness, I guess. The other one is it seems to have to do with like sexual magic, right? Like I don't know. I've seen a bunch of books about sexual magic. I have no idea like what it is or how it works, but it seems like so there's something going on here where through the act of sexual energy transfer, there's some sort of change of consciousness / manifestation happening that is powered by the sexual energy transfer. Is that what's happening? And then Ra in this particular 31.3, he's Ra specifically talking about the positive energy positive magic, but I imagine there's probably negative magic that can also be done through sexual energy transfer.
Right. Yeah, it does seem like they say that you're able to transfer blockage, right? That the nature of the transfer of energy or of the blockage of this energy. So I wonder if that is negative transfer, is transferring blockage. I don't know.
Would the blockage prevent the magic from happening? So like what's happening here? So like I understand the change of actually I don't understand the change of consciousness. Like Ross, what is he gives some examples, right? He says like you can heal, knowledge of service, whether it be knowledge of service or ability to heal. How do you get knowledge of service through sex? I don't know.
I have some thoughts about that, but anybody else want to jump in? So knowledge of service to me is like I think that just means like understanding of the significance of service or something like that. Like in a sexual energy transfer, there's the opportunity to be so close with another being and to like experience that other being so powerfully and experience the desire to serve. And I think we offer that to one another through being so close. You know, like in my experience of being so close with Aaron, I give him the experience of his own desire to serve me, right? So like I'm serving him by offering him knowledge of his service. That's the way I take it. And I could be wrong, but that's, yeah. And I also, the first time we went through this material years ago in study group, I got this just powerful image of the rainbow, like our rainbow can light up, like our all of our pathways, you know, or like all of our rays can light up, you know, like in the description of the crystallized healer. And I think it's similar, you know, in sexual energy transfer, like whatever brightness I'm able to transmit is in a way my knowledge of the creator, my knowledge of the fullness of the rainbow, which can look like so many different things, but it also is whatever access to freedom, because I think we limit ourselves, and the limitation of ourselves through identity is what it is another word for blockage, at least in the way that I think of it. And so any sort of like fullness of rainbow that I'm able to have in sexual energy transfer makes that information, makes that accessible to the other person that I'm with, and then vice versa. Like whatever, you know, whatever fullness of rainbow ray that Aaron has available, it becomes more available when somehow when we're in the sexual energy transfer, like there's some, like it seems like biological mechanical thing where, like, you know, you start to feel it, it's like, whoa, I'm opening, and then like whatever rays Aaron has on that I may be less, you know, more dim or whatever, like it becomes available. So that's another way that I think about the like how the mechanism works. That's just an image that kind of makes sense to me. You're muted.
I have some comments.
Yeah, please.
Um, there's you know, 2 or 3 topics that I think are that Ra teaches that I think are like the most central to, like, I think they're essential as a teacher, like what they have to offer. And I think sexual energy transfer is one of them. My sense is that it's like it's quite a important part of their evolution. I think it's a big part of their experience in third density. And it's another thing that's it fills out the available teachings just in the general spiritual literature. I feel like their teachings on sexual energy transfer are very helpful. So when they talk about, you know, what takes place, maybe we haven't read it yet, but you know, the charge, the potential difference between 2 entities, and how it, you know, how it moves across a polarized space, potentiated space. Oh, we did. Energy transfer implies the release of potential energies across, shall we say, a potentiated space. So it's like, the way I take that is that just the basic mechanism, what's going on is that one person desires to contact another, and the other person desires contact in return. So that desire that's pointed at the 2 entities across the space builds a charge. And then if the entities choose to act on that and allow it to move, then the charge is able to move across the space, and the entities receive the energy and exchange the energy that's built up through that mutual desire. I mean, that's the basic mechanism that we're talking about. And one of the things that's really a deep part of, I think, this whole process is that it's almost like sexual energy transfer and sexual exchange and sex is kind of like the main point of creation. Like in a unified creator, in the one infinite creator, there is no capacity to experience sexual energy exchange because there's no limitation and there's no difference. It's a state of consciousness and a state of mystery where there is no separation of self from self. So there's no sexual energy transfer available. I imagine it's joy. There's just a sea of infinite joy in that. I mean, it's hard to describe what the infinite creator's experiences of itself unmanifest. But I think in order to like manifest the experience for itself, to be able to exchange is primary. It's a primal reason why I think the creator creates the universe, is to have the experience of separation, because what that makes available is sexual energy exchange. And we're talking about it in the context of human interaction and relationships, but I think it's the yin and the yang that is the energy that drives everything, that drives the creation of galaxies and suns, is like the yin and the yang energies of dark and light. So yeah, there's so much here. Yeah. And then the piece about in 31.3, Shang, in response to your question about service, coming into understanding of service, it's like when two entities choose to do, to participate, I mean, especially at a conscious level, to do this consciously, it allows each person to experience themselves as the one infinite creator more powerfully than they did before. And the more we come in contact with ourselves as the creator and realize that in increments, which is traveling the spiritual path, is the same thing as like empowering our service, our particular service, like whatever is essential to us, whether it's serving others through healing or serving others through teaching or whatever it is. Like when we know ourselves as the creator, it just strengthens that, whatever that is, I think. And I think sexual energy transfer like moves us up the column of light. It moves us closer to the creator. And in that process, it just empowers our service, whatever it is.
Cool. Neil?
I can't remember if it was from session 26, but they talked about Carla and Jim having sex, and then Carla having an extra amount of energy for the channeling. And then I assume that sexual energy transfer allowed Carla to have more physical energy, while Jim had that more wisdom based from Carla to understand his service to her more. And so that was kind of an example in the books of a transfer, I guess, that I saw. But it's like in our society, that blockage of energy is the like red ray, and you don't really know yourself as the creator. And like my personal experience in college is just a bunch of drunk guys trying to get with any girl they want, and it doesn't really have any meaning. There's no heart energy there, and so you're just having this meaningless sex. And I guess once you find that person where you can connect heart to heart, that allows the creator to know itself in this joyous moment, and there's not just this drunken fake type of relationship, but the actual heart's open allows that knowing of, wow, we are, here together to do this as, equal and aware.
Yeah. Totally. And one thing that I was reminded of, just kind of in response to what you were saying about like, it's just meaningless sex, and like, oh yeah, that's so true. And at the same time, in this version of the book, it does have again, 2638 printed again. And so I reviewed that, and it was talking about the entities who have a never-ending appetite for sex. And it says what these vibratory levels are seeking is green ray activity. You know, so even in that meaningless, like what that stimulates for me anyway, like even in the, you know, what we call meaningless, you know, hookup or whatever, there it is a seeking in a way. It's like I like it's not giving me what I want, but it still is like I'm seeking something. Yeah. So that just felt relevant to share. How about we continue? Because there's more on this topic and then we can unpack more.
Can I ask one more question about
Yeah, sure.
this? Is there's a specific line where it says work and what you may call magic may be done. What is the definition of magic here?
Aaron.
Well, they have defined magic as the ability to affect consciousness at will. Ra has defined magic as the ability to affect consciousness at will. So that's magic. And then just a comment about what I think that they're talking about in sexual magic is like, I'm just going to speak to positively oriented sexual magic. I think there's probably things we could talk about negatively oriented, but in positively oriented sexual magic, when two entities are, you know, opening their hearts and exchanging that energy, there's a tremendous amount of, you know, power that's being exchanged. And I think in that context, if one or both entities holds in their mind a vision of what they want to serve, then that vision is accelerated in the manifestation process. I mean, I think that's the essential what's happening. So like, you know, if it's like healing the earth, you know, if the two entities like hold the vision of the earth being served by the goodness that they're experiencing, the joy they're experiencing in the process, that energy gets sent to the earth and the earth feels it and experiences it and it raises the vibration of the earth. Or if it's to heal an entity outside of the exchange, or if it's to whatever it is, I feel like the sexual magic is basically leveraging the power that's amplified during the exchange and pointing it in a very specific direction to affect consciousness.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, appreciate that take. So picking up at 31.4. Anybody feel like picking it up?
I can read.
Great.
Okay. Questioner, can you expand somewhat on the concept that this action not only allows the creator to know itself better, but also creates, in our density, an offspring, or makes available the pathway for another entity to enter the density? I am Ra. As we have previously said, the sexual energy transfers, including the red ray transfer, which is random and which is a function of the second density attempt to grow, to survive, shall we say. This is a proper function of the sexual interaction. The offspring, as you call the incarnated entity, which takes on the mind-body complex opportunity offered by this random act or event called the fertilization of egg by seed, causes an entity to have the opportunity to then enter this density as an incarnate entity. This gives the two who are engaged in this bisexual reproductive energy transfer the potential for great service in this area of the nurturing of the small experienced entity as it gains an experience. It shall be of interest at this point to note that there is always the possibility of using these opportunities to polarize towards the negative. And this has been aided by the gradual building up over many thousands of your years of social complex distortions, which create a tendency towards confusion, shall we say, or baffling of the service to others aspect of this energy transfer. and subsequent opportunities for service to other selves. Questioner, if a sexual energy transfer occurs in green ray, and I am assuming in this case that there is no red ray energy transfer, does this mean it is impossible then for the particular transfer to include fertilization and the birthing of an entity? I am Ra. This is incorrect. There is always the red ray energy transfer due to the nature of the body complex. The random result of this energy transfer will be as it will be, as a function of the possibility of fertilization at a given time in a given pairing of entities. The green ray energy transfer occurs due to the vibratory rate of each entity being undistorted in any vital sense by the yellow or orange ray energies. Thus, the gift, shall we say, being given freely, no payment being requested either of the body, of the mind, or of the spirit. The green ray is one of complete universality of love. This is a giving without expectation of return. Questioner, I was wondering if there was some principle behind the fact that a sexual union does not necessarily lead to fertilization. I'm not interested in the chemical or physical principles of it. I'm interested in whether or not there is some metaphysical principle that leads to the couple having a child or not, or is it purely random? I am Ra. This is random within certain limits. If an entity has reached the seniority whereby it chooses the basic structure of the life experience, this entity may then choose to incarnate in a physical complex which is not capable of reproduction. Thus, we find some entities which have chosen to be unfertile. Other entities, through free will, make use of various devices to ensure non-fertility. Except for these conditions, the condition is random.
I think we could pause there.
I mean, one comment that I have about the distortions they talk about, the negative distortions. This has been aided by the gradual building up over many thousands of years of social complex distortions, which create a tendency towards confusion. I mean, I think that's just so true. There's so much, there's so much distortion in the like depictions of sexual energy, in the customs of this planet around sexual energy. I mean, there's so much that gets in the way of, I think, the potential that Ra is describing here about how sex can be used for spiritual evolution. There's so much in our culture that works against that potential.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I definitely have experienced that in this sort of cultural archetypes that are made available to women. You know, there's like, to just sort of be overly simplistic, there's like the you know, there's like a nun or like a serving mother, you know, like someone whose heart is really open is usually like depicted in a way where they are not interested in sexual like pleasure in any way. Or there's the other side of it that's like you know, like the promiscuous kind of woman is really selfish. You know, the woman who's interested in pleasure is really selfish, and that is really interesting, the kind of bifurcation of that. And I know, like myself and a lot of, you know, women friends that I know kind of struggle with those, like, I don't fit either one. Like, how do I be in between? And I think it's because that they're not accurate, but they're still so prevalent
I have a comment.
Yeah.
What Ra is referring to with the thousands of years of buildup, and what I took from that was looking at our history. First of all, it's called his story, not her story. That's a whole nother one. But thousands of years of history, most of which was not a positive, wonderful life experience for a lot of people. There's a lot of negative distortion that is built up for our spirit complex that I feel that we're wading through the history that's there. Our previous incarnations feel those past life traumas or past life grievances towards another being, or the cultural norms back then that kind of peaks and valleys of positively oriented sexual energy transfers to really bad traumatic events. So when Ra is saying thousands of years, I'm feeling all that history behind us that our human culture has weighing upon us, that is in the memory, is in the grid, is in, without, I don't want to say reparations, but without acknowledging and only focusing on the positive without there being a healing aspect. So it's not necessarily common that people have an exact moment of past life remembrance to say and point, I remember this event in vivid detail. That's what's going on. That's why I'm struggling this lifetime with this particular thing. We don't often have that recollection, but a lot of us that are waking up and becoming aware might get a sense of, okay, whatever's going on with me feels connected to something deeper than what's happened in my current incarnation. So it could be a direct past incarnation that we're carrying that wound or that soul trauma. And it could be the wading through the thickness of what's left over in the planetary grid in our memory complex that way. So there is a lot to sift through to even get to this point, even if focused on healing, even if focused on the positives that I think may not be acknowledged. Like, oh, that's in the past, let's just ignore that and move forward. And there's validity to that. And there's validity to pausing and saying, okay, the acknowledgement that there's a lot on so many levels that is at work that we have to kind of wade through. So.
Yeah. Jump in, Aaron.
Did any of you see Barbie, the movie Barbie?
Yeah.
No.
Well, one of the things that stands out to me that's relevant, and I'm bringing it up, is like it has, I mean, it's the most like overt and mainstream kind of depiction of as a society waking up to the negative impacts of the patriarchy, of patriarchal culture. Like the way that they just speak so directly and kind of like in a tongue-in-cheek way to the negative impacts on women, especially about patriarchal culture, is a pretty epic thing. It's a pretty epic moment, like that like it can be talked about so openly. And I think it represents, a groundswell of the awareness of the negative impacts of, patriarchal culture, which I think the essential kind of, negative impact on that is, possession, the possessiveness of men over women, whether it's, fathers and then, husbands, which is still embedded in many cultures or across the world. It's y'all, that's still happening. It's so fucking crazy. And then the control of fertility, women's fertility. You know, men having control over women's fertility. Like those two things are just so profoundly, you know, against positive, you know, supporting the free will of an entity and seeing them as the creator and supporting them having, you know, moving towards what they desire. Anyway, so yeah, Nia, it's so important and profound. And I mean, I feel like even if there was an entity who was able to who somehow threaded the needle and had life experiences in the past that weren't profoundly negatively impacted by the culture of that, like it's so deeply a part of the Earth's planetary mind, you know, like that the impacts of that are just and they're still manifesting. It's like, you know, there is awareness, there is awakening happening. There are people who are like, wait a second, that's not the way we choose. That's not the way it's in alignment with our values, but it's still happening. Anyway, it's a big impactful thing.
Yeah, and even the extent to which that like the ownership of women is falling away, like it's the vestiges of it are everywhere, you know, like still in movies, like there'll be a wedding and they'll say man and wife, for instance. You're a man and you're unchanged, but now she's a wife, you know, or like every time a woman takes the man's last name, you know, is now she has been taken into his, you know, and like now she's a Mrs., but he's unchanged. He's still exactly the same Mr. with all of his exact same name and all things like that. It's kind of crazy. Like even though it's like we're moving beyond it, it's still everywhere. Yeah. Shall we read some more? 31:7. I can pick up. Questioner, thank you. In the material earlier, you mentioned magnetic attraction. Could you define and expand upon that term? I am Ra. We used the term to indicate that in your bisexual natures, there is that which is of polarity. This polarity may be seen to be variable according to the, shall we say, male-female polarization of each entity, be each entity biologically male or female. Thus, you may see the magnetism when two entities with the appropriate balance, male-female versus female-male polarity, meeting and thus feeling the attraction which polarized forces will exert one upon the other. This is the strength of the bisexual mechanism. It does not take an act of will to decide to feel attraction for one who is oppositely polarized sexually. It will occur in an inevitable sense, giving the free flow of energy a proper, shall we say, avenue. This avenue may be blocked by some distortion towards a belief condition which states to the entity that this attraction is not desired. However, the basic mechanism functions as simply as would, shall we say, the magnet and the iron. Questioner, we have what seems to be an increasing number of entities incarnate here now who have what is called a homosexual orientation in this respect. Could you explain and expand upon that concept? I am Ra. Entities of this condition experience a great deal of distortion due to the fact that they have experienced many incarnations as biological male and as biological female. This would not suggest what you call homosexuality in an active phase were it not for the difficult vibratory condition of your planetary sphere. There is what you may call great aura-infringement among your crowded urban areas in your more populous countries, as you call portions of your planetary surface. Under these conditions, the confusions will occur. Questioner, why does density of population create these confusions? I am Ra. The bisexual reproductive urge has as its goal not only the simple reproductive function, but more especially the desire to serve others being awakened by this activity. In an overcrowded situation where each mind-body-spirit complex is under a constant bombardment from other selves, it is understandable that those who are especially sensitive would not feel the desire to be of service to other selves. This also would increase the probability of a lack of desire or a blockage of the red ray reproductive energy. In an uncrowded atmosphere, this same entity would, through the stimulus of feeling the solitude about it, then have much more desire to seek out someone to whom it may be of service, thus regularizing the sexual reproductive function. Questioner, roughly how many previous incarnations, shall we say, would a male entity in this incarnation have had in the past as a female to have a highly homosexual orientation in this incarnation, just roughly? I am Ra. If an entity has had roughly 65% of its incarnations in the sexual biological body complex, the opposite polarity to its present body complex, this entity is vulnerable to the aura infringement of your urban areas and may perhaps become of what you call an homosexual nature. It is to be noted at this juncture that although it is much more difficult, it is possible in this type of association for an entity to be of great service to another in fidelity and sincere green ray love of a non-sexual nature, thus adjusting or lessening the distortions of its sexual impairment. So I'll just say, I know in the past when we read this particular piece, it can be one of the most controversial, right? So what do you think Ra means by that?
Why was it controversial?
I guess like specifically like calling, like at the end of 3110, for instance, Ross says sexual impairment, and like the sort of calling homosexuality like a sexual impairment, I think has been stimulating, you know, for people, especially like, I think we're in an era of like a lot of people like getting past the sense that like there's something wrong with them, you know, if they have that kind of inclination, like feeling attracted to people of the same gender, like, oh, it's our culture that called that wrong and that was never true. And so I think sometimes like people can hear this as Ra saying, no, homosexuality is wrong, there's something wrong with it. And I don't think that that's what Ra is saying. I don't think that there's something wrong with it, but I think it can be like, there's just a lot of sensitivity, I think it can be heard that way.
Does anybody have the reference on the footnote to read an essay examining the meaning of these Q&As regarding homosexuality? See the resource book? You're muted.
Aaron.
I'm not sure they ever published it or wrote it.
Yeah.
Because I know they had a plan for the resource series, and they either have drafts of or plans for, you know, for filling that out. But as far as I know, the only book that's been published under the resource series is a concept guide. And so I think they might be referring to something that hasn't yet been published. I'm not 100% sure about that. But they might be referring to, there was an essay that was written by a really dedicated student of Ra who wrote a whole treatment, like went through the whole book and like tried to unpack what Ra might mean by this piece here. and, makes the argument that it doesn't at all mean that there's anything that it's just what BJ was saying, that Ra is suggesting that homosexuality is in any way, wrong. And of course they don't, because they say there's no right or wrong. And maybe that's the piece that is intended to be published. It hasn't been published yet. I'm not sure, but I don't know that there's actually been anything published in the resource series that that's referring to.
My
Any other
only
thoughts or comments? Yeah, go ahead.
my only thought on this, I mean, it seems like a mechanistic description of circumstances without. I didn't even catch the the word impairment at all until I asked. The only thing that I thought was interesting is like 65% seems such a random number. Like it just seems like a really odd percentage, but other than that, like yeah, I guess it is what it is.
I mean, the percentage piece kind of makes sense to me because, I mean, I would kind of imagine if, souls set out into the octave and, they get to third density and they had the opportunity of, I mean, I'm sure it starts happening, but in second density, they start, we start experiencing space-time in a sexually polarized body that, it would kind of work out to be half and half. Like, you might imagine that as you travel through lives, you choose half your lives as one polarization and the other half is the other polarization because it offers such a unique and different and varied experience of life. And so it seems like, that's not always the case. And I'm sure there's a bell curve. And as you get far enough away from 50%, it's almost like there's even though souls or mind body spirit complexes isn't a sexed or gendered phenomenon, it's not. Sex and gender come into play in bodies, that there's like a bias, there's like if basically it's what it's like. So for me, if I was an entity who had 65% of my previous lives, I was in a woman's body, and then I found myself in an urban environment, in XYZ. It just seems like it's like that. They're just, I mean, it's a strange question that Don even asked the question, but I think Ra is just kind of like responding to the question and reading the record, and the record shows that like if there's a soul who has has developed a bias, has chosen incarnations in a certain sexual body, that bias might bleed through, irregardless of what body that is currently being chosen. There might be like a bleed through of soul bias, and it could manifest as attraction to the this sort of gender or sex that is the proper mate for its bias, even if it is hard for me to talk about this whole topic because I'm very sensitive to how hard it is for people who, are
Yeah.
homosexual or are gay and are really looking to be comfortable in that and be whole and, not feel like there's any dysfunction to that choice in that life path.
What I am unclear about is that with that 65% is like, suppose someone like just really wanted to be one gender, like 90% on like male or female, would that mean there's a higher chance of aura infringement affecting them, or is like it's not important, but like when Ross is 65%, I imagine like, oh, if you're above or below 65%, then like it's like 65% is like the highest chance of getting the aura infringement, which seemed just like a totally random number to me. But what your explanation really makes sense to me. But then that I would think like, oh, if you're like someone who's 90%, then you would really be vulnerable. Again, not important at all. But...
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to say before we go to you, Neil, I appreciate you, Aaron, like acknowledging the discomfort of stating what you were stating, but also leaning in to give it your, to give it a shot. I appreciate that. Okay, Neil.
Yeah, Sean, I was thinking about the same, like 90%. And like you have a person born a male that's just so convinced that they're female and goes through the sex change. And it's, the hardest thing. Like it's not easy. It's painful, the surgeries, what other people are going to think. And it's just so fitting in their skin to go through everything just because that's who they are. And I guess that kind of made somewhat sense to me of like this percentage of who you might be on the inside, but not necessarily on the outside. And I don't know. I just think with the seniority of incarnating on the planet and needing to kind of get out of this masculine energy that we're stuck in, like it's a way to have, a different type of creator on the planet of being more feminine, but looking masculine. And there's a lot of movements towards kind of that feminine energy. So we're seeing a lot of changes in kind of the souls that are incarnating. And there's a lot of, I would say feminine energy trying to come here, and they might be in male bodies. So hopefully it helps our planet, but it is very, controversial and just so difficult in our culture to just be who you are without people getting mad for just who you want to be. So
Yeah. Well, and I think it's, there's a lot that is tricky to grasp in terms of like how do we accept ourselves while also like understanding distortion, and what does it mean to accept ourselves, like accept behaviors that that do seem to be distorted, or that came through through a misunderstanding, or through ego or identity, or I think there's a lot that we wade through that like we're not supposed to understand. Yeah. Aaron.
There's two things I want to say. One is the thing about living in overcrowded environments, and how that might, for a sensitive soul, how that might almost like, block or turn down or incline them to not want to reach out and be of service to people. It's like, it makes a lot of sense to me. Like living in a city, let's say, and there's poverty, or there's just there's just a lot of people who need something, who don't have, who don't have or don't feel like they have what they need. And there's just so many calls for service happening. And, like if an entity was inclined towards being of service, but just gets overstimulated with being inundated with so many requests for service, I imagine it might like dampen, or like, they might armor up and just kind of like go within themselves or turn away or whatever. So outside of the sexual conversation and homosexuality, just the phenomenon of overcrowded situations really makes sense to me. Like I really just kind of get that. And I kind of feel that for myself. Like I know about myself deep down that I'm so committed to like serving people and being helpful and, being of service to others. And I also have a lot of, kind of shame and self-judgment for ways that I feel like I don't do it as much as I should. But and I feel like it's because when I look at what's going on there, it's like, it's so overwhelming. Like the calls for service that come from the world, like feel like so overwhelming. Like you could never respond to all the calls. And I can feel the way that anyway, I relate to that. I don't know if it's, I don't know if what they're talking about and my experience are the same thing, but it seems true. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And then other thing I wanted to say, I don't know if I have anything else. I think I covered everything. 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 I think I covered everything something else. I don't remember what it is. So never mind.
Yeah.
I hope you remember, Aaron, because I want to hear it, whatever it was. But that also was standing out to me very loudly as well. I feel like it's skipped over the importance of the overcrowded urban areas because of the nature of the conversational topic being homosexuality. And so I also wanted to point to that, and that our society is waking up and becoming aware of the rates of depression and anxiety and illnesses of people going to therapists. There is now a new certification out there that basically prescribes you're having a mental health issue, go out in nature. Like it's an actual prescribed methodology now that people that live in cities, especially the high urban area, concrete jungles, are told to go walk in a park for a minimum of 15-20 minutes a day, or sit on a park bench, be out, get space, allow your energy bubble to expand freely without considerable overlap, and therefore the distortions of other selves and their emotional and spiritual and energetic states affecting ours. So, they get into these larger levels of like, oh, I'm an empath. That means I'm highly sensitive being. And then, there's all these labels around what I think might be natural for most people would be to be in an empathic state, to be sensitive to other people's energy fluxes if we were in smaller villages and tribes, and or more spread out, in order to feel into ourselves more and get clear on ourselves with nature, being immersed in nature. And then when we're in contact and our spheres overlap with other selves, then we can be like, oh, they haven't said anything, they haven't, there's no look on their face, but you sense sadness around them. We have to block ourselves, we have to dampen and armor and wall up in a city. I say we have to. I was sick in the city, it wasn't pretty, and I could never figure out what was wrong with me because it was supposed to be so normal, and we were supposed to just keep pushing away anything that's uncomfortable and move forward for the sake of ignoring and dampening ourselves. Like this is a huge piece that I think deserves more acknowledgement around that. And picking apart, like I said, that all the mental health issues that are gesundheit are occurring, and it's as simple as get out of the city for a little while, and I feel like these are mechanics that if we're aware of them, we can more actively armor up purposefully, and then know that when we get to go home and be with people that we trust, overlapping our spheres, we can take that armor off and have there's also a mother psychological component here, where mothers, especially in the home, are so giving and so busy, and the kids need, and the partners need, and everybody needs, even the dogs need our attention, and we have sucked in our sphere. Our energy is contracted in a state of tension, and it's not until the kids are out of the house and we get time alone in the house that we can expand. And what happens for me is I sing when nobody's around, because it's the only time I feel my energy bubble expanded. Because even though it was loving, I'm still picking up on their stuff, and I'm wide open to my kids, especially around wanting to have my feelers out and be in touch with their sadness level or their whatever's going on. So again, just lots of moving pieces around that I think Raw doesn't exactly dissect the whole thing, but definitely hints towards a larger root with the urban aspects.
Yeah, Aaron. And then I think let's keep reading soon.
Okay. I love the vision of you. I love imagining you singing. Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that you do that. I suspect that this whole notion that Ra describes about overcrowded areas on Earth and the impacts of that, I have a theory that like it's totally possible to have cities like on an alternate planet or something that this doesn't happen. Like I think it's like the combination of like people being so pressed together in a small area and so much information being kind of like not exchanging across the veil between the subconscious and conscious mind. Like basically there's so much repressed information that we're not acknowledging and processing, but it's we totally carry it in our fields and we can feel each other's unprocessed stuff. And I think that is the dysfunction. But I imagine if there was like a planet where like there was a lot of health in being able to process the catalyst, that people could live close together and not like I'm sticking up for cities. I don't think cities, I think dense environments, I think mind body spirit complexes could live harmoniously in dense environments. I think what makes it the case on Earth where it's hard is that there's so much unprocessed stuff that we carry around and then we have to deal with, and we don't have good tools to deal with it. That's one comment. And the other thing I wanted to say was that like, this is totally speculative, but I feel like another thing that impacts like people's choices of, of a mate, having a sexual mate, or just having a sexual exchange is there's kind of it feels to me like there's like a blunt, view of sexuality and love in our culture and our civilization. Like if you love someone, I mean, especially in the context of, of people who are the same age and of opposite sex, like there's an assumption that that there either should be or it's appropriate for there to be sexual attraction. Anyway, I just feel like if we had more nuanced in our culture, if we had more nuanced ways of understanding love and expressing and experiencing love, and if men and women among themselves had more, if we just had better models for it, I think it would change the landscape of like this topic that we're talking about. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah,
I know for
it makes
myself,
a lot of sense to me.
as I was becoming like, as I was like a young adult, I had an urge to be close to men, but I didn't know, it felt, I had all these questions of like, am I gay? Cause like I just had such blunt and like, unhealthy models for, how to connect with people in a non-sexual way who I felt attracted to, and not necessarily sexually, but just wanted to be close to them.
I think that's a really good point, and it's something that I have wondered about related to the topic of sexual transfer, because there's obviously sexual energy transfer in the space of like heightened arousal or whatever, but like I wonder about the energy transfer that can happen outside of that, because we do know of that, like for instance with a crystallized healer there can be an energy transfer, and like I think there's probably a lot of opportunities for energy transfer that it is really loving, in non explicitly sexual containers, where we let down our walls and we open to one another, and it can be a really powerful, informative, loving experience, but doesn't have anything to do with being naked or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't Ross say at some point that like ultimately all energy transfers are sexual energy transfers?
Mm-hmm.
Does that ring a bell to anybody?
I don't remember.
Okay.
But it makes a lot of sense to me. Like Yeah.
But again,
Yeah,
just,
that's
I mean, I think not in a reproductive, capacity, or like you were saying, not
right.
in a let's put
Yeah.
our bodies together kind of way, but like, I think they say somewhere that like, all energy transfer is sexual or something. And I think it's pointing towards what I was saying before about like everything is, all of manifestation is an interchange of
Yeah.
the primal, the primal sexual energies.
Right.
Was
Anyway.
it Walter
Totally.
Russell that we were talking in The Secret of Light that was about everything was sexual energy transfer? I swear that was in
Maybe.
there.
I mean, kind of, yeah. Not in
Because
those
that was
words, but
also the picture of the octave where it was like everything's going, one piece is going in, and then that piece is going into another, and then it's like, to me, the mechanics of the, yin yang energy, dualistic, again, so many, um, so many points of energy transfer that are not necessarily sexual, but it can be creation energy, which can be both. Creation energy could be two non-sexually attracted to each other people, like you were saying, Aaron, that has that a magnetism, there's an attraction for connection that doesn't have to do with our sexual organs. It can be creation energy transfer that's not with our bodies, like you were saying. And I also want to point out that I feel like that's a lot of the focus of these men's groups. I'm so glad to see so many, dare I say, especially in our area, but all over. There's a lot of acknowledgement around men. Dare I say, of our generational ish age, that are like, there's no modeling. We need to be our own mentors at this point and model for each other those connection points, that camaraderie, that you can have a level of intimacy that is not sexual. It's emotional intimacy. It's, mental intimacy, but it's not sexual. So I just
Yeah.
want to give my props for you bringing that up, Aaron, and speaking to that, and my little shout out and thanks to those that are taking up that mantle, that are stepping up and doing the work, even if they have to
Yeah.
spearhead it, because there hasn't been that modeling in the past. So it's a beautiful thing to
Absolutely.
see these heading in a positive direction.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's like talking about the cultural, sexual distortions that we've all been wading through. I put some verbiage to the struggles that women have had, but then like you're speaking to some of the struggles within this culture that are put upon the men. Yeah. I think let's keep reading. I'm happy to pick up unless somebody wants to jump in. Okay, I'm going to read 11 through 14, and then let's discuss, and then we'll just read the last few after that. Okay, 3111, questioner. Timothy Leary, doing research, wrote that at the time of puberty and up through that time, there is an imprint occurring on the DNA coding of an entity, and that, for instance, sexual biases are imprinted due to early sexual experiences or some of the first sexual experience of the entity. Does anything like this actually happen? I am wrong. This is partially correct due to the nature of solitary sexual experiences. It is in most cases unlikely that what you call masturbation has an imprinting effect upon later experiences. This is similarly true with some of the encounters which might be seen as homosexual among those of this age group. These are often, instead, innocent exercises in curiosity. However, it is quite accurate that the first experience in which the mind-body-spirit complex is intensely involved will indeed imprint upon the entity, for that life experience, a set of preferences. Questioner. Does the Orion group use this, shall we say, as a gateway to impressing upon entities, shall we say, preferences which could create negative polarization? I am wrong. Just as we of the Confederation attempt to beam our love and light whenever given the opportunity, including sexual opportunities, so the Orion group will use an opportunity if it is negatively oriented or if the individual is negatively oriented. Questioner: is there any emotional bias that has nothing to do with male-female sexual polarity that can create sexual energy buildup in an entity? I am Ra. The sexual energy buildup is extremely unlikely to occur without sexual bias upon the part of the entity. Perhaps we did not understand your question, but it seems obvious that it would take an entity with the potential for sexual activity to experience a sexual energy buildup. Questioner: I was thinking more of the possibility of the Orion group having influenced, say, certain members of the Third Reich, who I have read reports of having sexual gratification from the observation of the, in some cases, the gassing and killing of entities in the gas chambers. I am Ra. We shall repeat. These entities had the potential for sexual energy buildup. The choice of stimulus is certainly the choice of the entity. In the case of which you speak, these entities were strongly polarized orange-ray, thus finding the energy blockage of power over others, the putting to death being the ultimate power over others, this then being expressed in a sexual manner, though solitary. In this case, the desire would continue unabated and be virtually unquenchable. You will find, if you observe the entire spectrum of sexual practices among your peoples, that there are those who experience such gratification from domination over others, either from rape or from other means of domination. In each case, this is an example of energy blockage, which is sexual in its nature. Just a little light reading.
It's so not light reading. It's so not light reading. It's so not pleasant to think about. Should we just read the next two? Because they do relate. It's kind of a continuum of what you just read.
Sure. Anybody want to pick up? Should I continue with the light reading?
I'll read the next two. Questioner: okay. Would the Orion group then be able, shall we say, to impress on entities this orange ray effect? Or did they, is this the way that this came about? Is what I'm trying to get at. Is this the way these concepts came about on this planet? Because if we go back to the beginning of third density, there must be a primal cause of this. I am Ra. The cause of this is not Orion. It is the free choice of your peoples. This is somewhat difficult to explain. We shall attempt. The sexual energy transfers and blockages are more a manifestation or example of that which is more fundamental than the other way about. Therefore, as your peoples became open to the concepts of bellicosity and the greed of ownership, these various distortions then began to filter down through the tree of mind into body complex expressions, the sexual expression being basic to that complex. Thus, these sexual energy blockages, though Orion influenced and intensified, are basically the product of the beingness chosen freely by your peoples. This will be the final question, unless we may speak further upon this question to clarify or answer any short queries before we close. Questioner: I just need to know if this then works through the racial memory to infect the entire population in some way. Does that sort of thing happen? I am Ra. The racial memory contains all that has been experienced. Thus, there is some, shall we say, contamination, even of the sexual, this showing mostly in your own culture as the various predispositions to adversary relationships, or, as you call them, marriages, rather than the free giving one to another in the love and the light of the infinite creator.
Adversary relationships?
Yeah, that's funny, right?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
That I think Okay. It seems like Ra is, based off what I am getting from this entire session, is that sexual energy transfer, if it's unblocked, is inherently positive, and the like that transfer is like a positive like energy. Like when we think, when I'm thinking in terms of the positive and the negative path, it seems like the negative path is blockage. Is that correct? Like there is no negative energy negative sexual energy transfer. The entire negative path is and is blocking the energy transfer. Is that correct?
I mean, I think absolutely it's correct. We know for sure that the foundation of fourth ray negative is the blockage of the heart ray, the complete blockage of the heart ray. I mean, it's so fundamental to the negative path. At least the blockage of green ray energy. But then, in this session where they talk about, the crazy thing they talk about with the Nazis, and that being fueled by blockage in the orange ray, that's another, example of that blockage. And then it reminds me of when Ra says the first separation is of self, is the self from the self, which has all to do with like the lower triad of chakras, like our personal self is all this lower triad. So there'd be blockages there too on the negative path, because we're not comprehending the true nature of reality of the self being embedded in a larger self, transpersonal self.
Well, I mean, it does say, like in 3112, just as we of the Confederation attempt to beam our love and light whenever given the opportunity, so the Orion group will use an opportunity if it is negatively oriented, or if the individual is negatively oriented. So I guess how would they, what's your imagining, Shang, of how they use that opportunity? Like, because we did look at, and I think I pointed out before that there was in let's see, what is that one, 31.2, the nature of the transfer of energy or of the blockage of this energy. Were you, I guess I'm just trying to understand what you were saying, like you're guessing that transfer of energy is positive, and so the negative transfer is transfer of blockage. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, except if there's blockage, is there even transfer? Or yeah, I this seems new to me, because yeah, when I started the session I was like, oh yeah, you can transfer positive or negative, but it seems like there is no such thing as a negative transfer. If there's a transfer, then it's positive, and the negative is about blocking the transfer, in which case I think that blockage also, I remember there was another session about if there's blockage, it increases some sort of, on both sides it can increase frustration, and that perhaps the act of blocking the transfer itself creates a change in consciousness, in a negative sense. That's the impression that I'm getting. I don't know if it's correct from this. And why do I think that? Why did there's something about I don't know where I'm getting this from. I think I just somehow based off like the little bits and pieces throughout all the. Did Ross say explicitly somewhere? I'll go
I don't
back and
know.
review.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me though, and it's super stimulating. It's a lot to think about. Aaron, did you want to jump in?
I think it's a combination of like some of the things in the beginning where they say like just like the active energy transfer is joy and all this stuff, which seems like very positive. And then the comments towards the end of like all of the negative entities, a big part of why they do this kind of stuff is because they have very strong blockage. That's my impression. I don't think Ra has explicitly said that, but that's what I'm getting.
Yeah.
I mean, your
Go ahead,
question
Aaron.
your question resonates for me, Sean. I struggle with a similar question of what is the nature of the negative path and the lower triad specifically, and energy transfer. But in this moment, what I think is that, like, I think you're right. I think all energy transfer is, I mean, it's almost like you can't even say positive or negative. It's just that all energy transfer, there's only one energy. There is only one energy. It's intelligent energy. There aren't two energies. Isn't like there's positive and negative energy. It's that beings that have chosen the positive path are working accurately with what's happening. It's the path that is. And the negative path is the path that is not. Like Ra has said, the negative path, they call it the path that is not because they're working in falsehood. They're working as though they are actually separate. And it's just not the case. No one is ever separate. But the entire philosophy of the negative path is of, the glorification of the self as an independent entity. And so energy transfer would always be the transfer of intelligent energy. It's not really positive or negative energy, but it's the energy. It's the primal energy. That's the only energy there is. So yeah, I think in that way you're right. Like there's only one kind of transfer. There's only, but then on the negative path, there certainly would be successful energy transfer, at least in the red ray, because people in the negative path reproduce. And reproduction is a successful energy transfer. I mean, it's literally just fertilization. So at least on the red ray, at least in one of the three of the lower triad, there is sexual energy transfer. And then in terms of transferring blockages, I think there's some truth to that, although I think it makes more sense to me to say that, like, if a negative entity is blocked in the lower triad, and then there's a relationship or an interaction with another entity, if that other entity is also interested in the negative path, they sort of just gain strength in their own blocking of that. Like they just learn how to block. Like they're just teaching each other how to be blocked. Like you don't actually transfer blockage so much as just like both entities can be strengthened in their blocking, but they're not really transferring blockage so much. That's how I think
Yeah.
about
Yeah, that relates to what this was stimulating for me too, that like if negative transfer is just transfer of blockage, like if there's really just openness, like which could be openness to reality, openness to the truth, the way of it, or like blocking the way of it and seeing things backwards, then like the transfer of energy makes sense to me in terms of like if I'm open, there is actually something that perhaps you could send to me through shining your rays, which then, like, conversely, perhaps what I'm just curious about is like, what if there, like, and this is something that I've heard from the mystics, that there isn't actually something that like negatives can like do to us. In a way, we have to, like, in a way, be interested or open to it, like someone could transfer or make an offering to me of the potential of closing myself down or of like believing in separation, for instance, but I would have to be interested in it in a way, which, anyway, I'm not necessarily saying this is true, but it's just kind of curious to me in this moment. And yeah, I just kind of wonder about that. Like, maybe there isn't, in a way, like in that way of thinking, if that's accurate, there isn't really such a thing as negative power. There can be negative influence, and I can like get hooked by that, but only if, in a way, I was interested in it. And again, I'm not necessarily proposing that this is accurate. I'm just kind of wondering. Mia.
So I have a thought that is, I don't know, potentially controversial as well, but it's the part 31.11 where they talk about the DNA influence. And I was thinking about a guy I saw the other day who's a recovering alcoholic drug addict and spent 5 years in prison. And I found out from a coworker that he spent in time in prison because he decided to touch little boys. And why did he do that? Because he himself was touched as a kid. So when he was young and unaware of his energies and what was happening, that was imprinted and then later passed on to him as a thing or a negative sexual transfer then to another child. And then I think of the control of, you could say, the Catholic or those higher up in power that have been caught doing that type of sexual act. And I kind of dabbled in the understanding of what the QAnon and that whole conspiracy, and they try to use the sex trafficking of children and the whole like adrenochrome and the crazy stuff about our children. And it seems like that's an avenue of control and power of using our kids, and oh, they're sexualizing our kids. And I see that way in our current society as corruption and control in this weird way of making kids the victim of sexual acts. So just a thought.
More light material. Thanks for sharing it though. Sean, you put your hand down. You still want to share now?
What was your sorry? What was your question earlier, West, that you asked, like that you were just talking about?
I was talking about maybe just kind of based off what you were sharing, what I was stimulated towards was like maybe there's not such a thing as negative transfer.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So like the negative path, like especially in sexual and during negative sex, is viewing the other self as an object, right, for your own self. In that case, like I was thinking like the very act of an energy transfer is like seeing the energy of the others, like seeing the light in me sees the light in you, the light in you sees the light in me. It seems like to succeed on a negative path, you need to shut that off. Like you don't want to see that. I don't want to see the light in you. You're my toy. Like I don't want to acknowledge you as a creator. So that seems inherently like almost like a requisite to proceed in the negative path is to shut down these, is to block these transfers. At least that's how I'm interpreting it. And it is curious to me how, like, I think I forgot where, if Ross specifically mentions this, but how like if that the recipient of that is also like charged or energized to do that to others. I don't know how that works, like, or why that would work, but that seems to be the impression that I get, where like if you're the recipient on the receiving side of that, there's something done to your, like there's something that happens to you also, that this ties into what Neil said about like the imprinting, or like I think if you're on the receiving side of that affects you somehow.
Right. And then there was the piece about when they discussed this earlier in the sessions, they discussed like in negative interactions, there's like the desire to possess or control, but then there's the corresponding desire to be possessed or controlled. Like some negative relationships are based on that dynamic of like negativity isn't always the one to be the possessor or the dominator. Sometimes it's the one to be possessed and dominated.
Right. Yep.
It's still based on separation, but it's just, you know, the inverted, it's control from the, you know, from the whatever receiving end of the
Yeah,
domination.
totally. Well, I guess maybe let's read the last question and then do our best to radiate the love and the light that has been engaged through this study with others. Anybody want to read 3117? I will do it. Questioner. That was precisely the point which I was trying to make. Thank you very much. Not to tire the instrument, I will just ask then if there's anything we can do to make the instrument more comfortable or to improve the contact. I am Ra. Please be aware that this instrument is somewhat fatigued. The channel is very clear. However, we find the vital energy low. We do not wish to deplete the instrument. However, there is a, shall we say, energy exchange, which we feel an honor duty to offer when this instrument opens itself. Therefore, counsel we this instrument to attempt to assess the vital energies carefully before offering itself as open channel. All is well. You are conscientious. I am Ra. I leave this instrument and you in the light, in the love, and in the light of the one infinite creator. Go forth then, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one creator. Adonai.
Can I just make a brief comment on that last,
please.
the maintenance piece? It seems like what
Yeah.
Ra is saying is that, you know, if the group and then Carla specifically, if they do the preparations to do a Ra session and she makes herself available, they say they, you know, they're like, we feel it's our honor duty to offer when the instrument is open to itself. So like they came to this session, they saw that she was depleted, but she had already expended the resources. By the time she's on the table, she's already spent her will. She's already spent the vital energy that it's going to take. And so they're like, okay, well, let's do the session. But they're trying to just teach her to be more aware of her vital energy so that she can not make herself available if she's depleted.
Yeah.
And I remember even in the Tilting at Windmills book, they talk about, you know, Carla even getting to that point of, I'm ready to die. Like she's ready to just pretty much martyr herself to wither away. And they have to physically tell her, like, we're not going to ask any questions. You need to stop. And she was just so dedicated to bringing this information. And it's just so inspiring, the just joy that she had for channeling this and making Dawn happy. And so just so inspiring their just dedication to this work, and grateful to be reading it, no matter how weird and interesting the session was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's one more thing I want to say, which is like, maybe it'll be a closing comment, but it's hard and unpleasant to talk about the dark things, and it's important. And it's especially important to talk about them in a way that's balanced and not just like, well, first of all, not get caught up in the drama of it and like, you know, us versus them, but also not avoid it either. And I appreciate that we do it. I appreciate that we can, you know, can open ourselves to just being clear witnesses to reality, and it includes a lot of darkness. And I think it's important that we're willing to do that.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I was hoping to close with something like that as well. Like I think when we're able to, as I know that we intend to do within the TOTOH Collective, shine the light into all the corners. I think it does have positive benefit, you know, certainly in our own lives, because there's less, I think in my experience, there's less, we're less able to be influenced, you know, because there's less that we're afraid of. And I think we're afraid of what hides in the shadowy corners and like, don't talk about it. Oh, it's going to get you, you know, it's like the boogeyman. And when we're able to say like, well, this is what's happening, and yeah, it may seem scary, but we can shine the light on it. And yeah, and I also wanted to just close really intentionally with the prayer that all benefit gained here through this study radiate out and benefit the collective. And may we all have the opportunity to wake up, those who are interested in waking up to reality, those who are interested in the positive path. May our work support you.
Thanks, BJ.
Thanks, you guys.
Yay.
Have a good week.
Love y'all. See you next week. 32.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.